All right, let's return to this story. This year's 16 Days of Activism campaign has been undermined by reports that the Gender-Based Violence Command Centre, run by the Department of Social Development, has completely collapsed. We were in conversation, but some technical issues. Let's bring her back. Gender-Based Violence Research Specialist Lisa Vetten. Lisa, very quickly, we've actually had conflicting statements from the Minister and her Deputy. That's pretty alarming, but you were saying that there is a service, but essentially it's just a counselling service when it was intended to be much, much more, no referrals or anything like that happening.
So it would seem, I think you're quite right that there is a great deal of conflicting information being put out there. But from what we can tell from checking on the line and testing it, the geolocation functions don't appear to be in use anymore, or the please call me, or the Skype function for deaf callers, which makes it very difficult for emergencies to be attended to, and if somebody doesn't always know where a caller is calling from, it also complicates the whole process of referring. So it's now, I think, just a telephonic help service on a par with our other telephonic help services in the country.
And the reports around the cost, not only of the tender, but also for the victims, Vodacom apparently was subsidising the calls. So you're saying victims who phone in do it at their own cost. That's what you understand?
That's what I understand. So that USSD SMS function doesn't work anymore. I think there are also other questions of cost that we have to take into account. Is that you must remember that the call centre is staffed entirely by social workers who obviously earn a certain amount of money. So it's not just the technology that costs, it's also the costs of social workers. So this is a line that does end up costing a lot more than the ordinary telephone services offered by, say, Lifeline or Childline. And you could justify that if it still has these specialised functions. But if it doesn't, then it is very, very hard to justify, because it is a cost that doesn't offer the kind of value that victims need. And I think the other thing you also have to take into account when you're dealing with a telephone helpline, and here I speak from personal experience, is that you get a very high number of hoax calls, or people who simply hang up, or when the phone is picked up, or who go quiet. So you might receive a very high number and volume of calls, but the actual number of calls that become cases, people who are looking for help, is very small. And we can see that in the command centre. Roughly 8% of their well over 100,000 calls are actual cases of people looking for help. But it would seem that only a third of those are actually looking for GBV. So in many ways, although it's being presented as a GBV command centre, that's not what constitutes the bulk of its calls. So it means you're paying a lot of money for social workers to deal with hoax calls as well. So I think there's a real need to think about what is best for victims and what is most affordable and therefore useful.
Yeah. Do you welcome the Public Protector investigation, and what do you make of what the Minister said, that a tender was given to somebody else after Vodacom because small black-owned companies need support as well? There is reasoning there, but you're saying the services are simply so different.
Yes, I think that is a very fair principle in order if we are to change patterns of inequality in this country. However, and the Minister also said this, is that you don't want to, in the process, offer a vastly reduced or inferior service, especially if it's going to cost so very much more. And this is what seems to have happened. I think it's very important that the Public Protector investigates this, because I think we have two very conflicting points of view being put across by the two most senior individuals in the Department of Social Development. This undermines our belief in what those two ministers will say in future. So we need to know what is actually going on here. And especially, I think, in relation to a problem as serious as gender-based violence. We need to know that we can trust politicians when they say something. So,
Lisa, you're referring to the Minister who said the reports that the call centre had collapsed were false, and then the Deputy Minister saying, yes, basically it had collapsed. So a direct contradiction. And that is worrying. And my question to you finally is just, this is the department dealing with the most vulnerable in our society. Ministers come and go, but it's often in the news for the wrong reasons. Do you agree? Is there a problem?
There is a very serious problem within the Department of Social Development, both nationally and provincially. And I think the kind of conflict that you're seeing between the two ministers may well be symptomatic of much deeper problems going on. I mean, you can see it in the provinces in relation to funding, how funding is decreasing towards services as we increase in terms of the cost of paying social work staff, because given Treasury's cuts, they can no longer be afforded by the revenue fund, they have to be paid for by the department. So I think we should be very deeply worried about what our services are going to look like next year. And when this happens against the backdrop of what looks like contradiction and conflict and a department that is dysfunctional, next year looks very worrying.
Indeed. Research specialist on gender-based violence, Lisa Vetten.